So as you know, we're here to talk a little bit about, the past few days we've been talking about big ideas, big cultural ideas, big things that people could do. We want to talk about what people can and should do. We want to build an agenda for this community writ large, because the community is not only the 600, 700, 800 people who've been at culture summits, but ones who will be at future summits, ones that we can bring together in future meetings, and the broader community that we communicate with throughout each year. And I thought the best way to begin that discussion would be to actually talk to some groups who are doing it. And Paul, the concept behind BOZAR, the concept that you have for convening communities in this really, really extraordinary organization goes back decades in terms of bringing together all the elements of the arts, but it also extends out into the future and how you're using new technology. And I thought maybe if you could just in a couple of minutes talk a little bit about how your concept dovetails with what we're talking about here.
It's, I would say, in first place, a great building, but the soft power of the building are the people. And it was a lady, Princess von Wittelsbach, who was a Bavarian and the grandniece of the King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the big sponsor of the composer Wagner. And she came to Belgium after a very sad period, just after the end of the First World War. We remember in Europe the end of that war. 80 million people died. And that's one of the things we do not enough remember. These all with narratives of the 20th century, First World War, Second World War, end of communism, and so on. And she came with a great idea to bring 200 families together, to bring a place. We discussed together with Christine May 68, apartheid, America, the black community, communism, that an art center could be, 100 years ago, a place who could come up with other ideas, were brought in by scientists, artists, and that was the start of multilateral thinking with the idea of the United Nations. And so in a place like Brussels, who became the European capital, a center could be a center to show empathy to the world of politicians, that culture could not solve the world, but could bring solutions. And that's a history of 100 years. That's BOZAR today.
But today you also, you talk to me a little bit about how you convene communities like the communities we're talking about to address various issues and to serve an agenda of casting the light of and the eye of the artist onto issues that need to be addressed.
But I think that the best example for the recent situation is the Brexit. And when I see that Wolfgang Tillman, one of the greatest photographers of our time, living in London, that he had 350,000 followers. He's not a politician, but in the first place an artist. That he could create a network of reflection about what is today the responsibility of an artist, and giving that back to the community. We took the initiative to bring a great number of artists together 3 days in Brussels with that engagement as cultural workers for Europe, to come out of that zone of comfort, to be a voice of what's going on, and certainly being less than 1 mile away from the most democratic body as the European Parliament. It was, I think, our responsibility. I think I couldn't do any other project. At the end, the output is art, it's narratives, and we are not a museum of history, so it's mostly a curatorial work where Christine is the curator of the summer project related to that collateral thinking, like William Kentridge says. Everything is connected. The May 68 movement in Paris or in Brussels, or the apartheid that David Goldblatt was photographing in South Africa, of what happened in the movements in the United States or in the Soviet Union. And today, BOZAR is trying to do that in an intersectoral way between art and science, and to show a lot of empathy to the difficult task of the political world, because you need this bureaucracy. We're always criticizing Brussels, as this bubble in Brussels. But you need, before you have soft power, you need a bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is democracy. And how you want to implement that, and I think to observe that, the art world and the science world is certainly a very important part of these 400 think tanks we can share between Washington and Brussels. But above these think tanks, who think they can solve the problems on an economic and political level, you need also the voice of the art world and the science world. They will make an important part and difference. And that's the narrative of an art center today, but it can be here in this region, how we can connect in a way, because at the end, it's a form of co-creation. We are here or there, we need to work together, and we are connected. Even in the digital time, is at the end, you will have an artistic output, and you need buildings. After the First World War, when Europe was destroyed, the narratives were festivals. At the end, artists don't need buildings. Edinburgh Festival, or Holland Festival, or Festival d'Automne, or Avignon, were these festivals we saw after dramatic momentums, First World War and Second World War. But at the end, you need this infrastructure. Abu Dhabi Louvre or Louvre Abu Dhabi are fundamental elements of showing the work bottom-up of a community.
Well, and I think that's an important point. Yesterday when we were at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and I was talking to some of the people from there, they were starting really to realize the power of a great building, to be a magnet for convening, and that no matter what other institutions may exist around them, people are going to look to them for leadership because they have the power of that building. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about here is essentially an idea that's a variation on the way people have historically looked at the world. You know, we talk about the media as the fourth estate because there were political and theological, military, and that the media, in terms of the dialogue that leads a nation, is the fourth estate. And I think what we're arguing here is that cultural leadership is the fifth estate, but they are part of that combination that leads a country. But in fact, they tend to lead a little bit more because they touch hearts. You know, we have a saying, and this does not refer to all politicians, nor is an exception now, but we have a saying that says, you know, when an audience hears a politician speak, they think the politician is asking for something. When an audience sees an artist perform, they see the artist is giving them something. And they connect to hearts instead of minds. And this is what drives change, and it drives systems of beliefs, and that's why it's so powerful. And so you need to have a holistic view of how societies work and recognize that this is not a luxury, this is not a side item, this is a central item. Now, Paul was talking about the role of festivals, the role of events like the one that you're behind have in convening, in reflecting the zeitgeist, reflecting, you know, the spirit of the moment. And I'm wondering to what extent that enters into your thinking in the work that you're doing, as not just as a presenter of art, but as a shaper of views and a participant in the moment.
Okay, so the International Biennial of Casablanca was initially, it started in 2012, and initially, so it's an independent initiative. It was created by Mostafa Romli, who's a visual artist, and it was basically the result of a residency that he created in the region of Essaouira, where every 2 years the work that had been created in the artist residency was shown in Casablanca. And when he invited me to take up the direction of the biennial, for me it was important that first of all the biennial was professionalized and had like a curatorial vision. And the way, so I've started working on the biennial since last year, and the way I see it, I've been, first of all, for me, it's very important as someone who works between Africa and the West, that the biennial is an independent and is a local initiative, because it's also part of how us as Africans, we are sort of reclaiming the discourse in culture and how, the terms of how the culture is being presented to the world. And the second thing is that for me, the project is very much, it's not about being a white cube, but it touches on a lot of things that have been discussed here, which is I'm really trying to see how we can engage different kind of audiences to take, within the remit of the biennial. On the one side, it's about creating a dialogue with artists from regions that are not necessarily, the center or Europe or like sort of Euro-American art scene, but also seeing how we can engage in conversations and common issues that we have in non-Western communities, non-Western art, art scenes. We were talking earlier, and I was saying I'm building new relationships, and I think for us, being based in Casablanca, it's also important to engage with the region. So there's that. There's the sort of geopolitics and how this would be reflected in terms of the art that's being shown, but also how we can go beyond the white cube and also engage with audiences that do not necessarily have access to art. And also, education is also a strong part of what we're going to do in the biennial.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying and what we're seeing here and what the Louvre reflects here, and I know you've done a lot of work in Africa as well as with other regions, is there's a kind of shift in the plate tectonics of culture.
Yeah.
And that entire regions that have been seen as apart from high culture, apart from the powerful centers of culture, are now being recognized with new museums in Africa, as we've discussed, with museums like the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, the new national museums, or the art centers of China, where there are more performing arts centers being built in China than the rest of the world added up. And if those art centers are filled
every day a new museum in China.
Every day.
Every day.
A new museum in China. So what does that mean? Thought leadership follows this. Cultural, not just awareness, but empowerment follows this. And I think that this is a sea change in the history of the world. It's really powerful. The media has a role to play in this. And I think sometimes the media treats some of these issues as light entertainment, or treats some of these issues as side issues. And I'm just wondering what your view is as you listen to this and how you think all that might change.
Yeah, well, good morning, David. Good to be here. I've been told we've got 25 minutes to make the world a better place.
Yeah, so that would give you 8. So
yeah, 8, all right. Better hurry then. Absolutely, I think media has a big role in helping percolate or diffuse the information out there, whether it's cultural or economic or political. I think it's important to even allow it to help spread the word, to help spread the narrative, or be part of building the narrative together within a community. And a few keywords come to mind, probably 3 C's or 5 C's, the 1A and T. One is consensus. I think media has has an ability to build consensus. Not all the time. I think that goes to the other C, which is the collaboration in terms of who are the stakeholders, who are out there that can make a difference, that are willing to come together and sit on that one platform or table and at least have the intention of saying, yes, I am here to make a difference. I'm here to make the world a better place. I'm here to listen to you and use your input as a value along with mine and yours and yours. So media can offer that platform, absolutely. Another C is the content, obviously. So what are the content that we are bringing to the table? Is it the actual structure, the physical structure, the place that houses the artwork or the music? Or is it just the written word? Or is it the picture? Or is it the videos? So all this content absolutely has a place or has or can be utilized by media, again, to percolate and diffuse and spread the word out there. A is for affinity, and I think there has to be affinity with culture. Are we really interested? Is culture appealing to the broader audience, or is it just to the elite? So these are the questions that need to be addressed. And I think being here, and we discussed that earlier, is, yes, this is probably a private event or by invitation, or numbers are limited that can for attendees to come here. But then what is happening beyond this room? How much of what we say, the music that's being played here, is heard by someone who's just sitting at home? And I think here that goes to the T, technology perhaps, and social media. We can use technology to help broadcast and showcase what we say, who we are, and that we are telling them that no, culture, such events, such conversations is for everybody. And so that goes to the word, I guess, C, community. That helps build communities around culture. And we did. When I was running the national newspaper, I left about a year and a half ago. I was there for about 3 years. We pushed. I think the challenge is just managing resources. And so how many people are there to report on culture or on the business or for the business section or the economy or politics? So it's managing resources. And at the same time, we do get inspired. So when such an event happens, we get excited. It's like, I want to be here. I want to attend. I want to sit. I want to hear the voices out there, the different voices, and hopefully capture that and publish it on the newspaper, print or digital. And we did collaborations. That's the other C. We did even beyond culture in terms of just coverage or interviews. Perhaps that might sound a bit more basic. We could do more, but we did stuff on STEM, and we had a Genes in Space project, and we have a young lady. The outcome was a young lady from school who won a prize, and she sent her genetic experiment to space. It was a partnership with Boeing. Her name is Alia Al-Mansouri, and she's now the poster child for the youth. For space. But we had other events around health, and that also we managed to identify stakeholders and build collaborations on an issue that matters. So again, for culture, who are the stakeholders, and can we come and sit together and put our minds together and make the world a better place?
Right, and I think what we're getting at here is you have the power of culture, but it doesn't exist in a box. It needs to be seen and interacted with, whether it's via an institution, or whether it's via festival, or whether it's via technology and the media. And I think one of the thoughts that we have here regarding Culture Summit is you need all of those things. We're starting initially with this seed of this group, but could there be a festival wrapped around it? Should we work with other institutions? How do we work with media? And in fact, I think this year is different from last year in that the National was a partner of ours this year. National Geographic was a partner of ours. Sky News has been a partner of ours. France 24, a bunch of other media partners have existed, and that's been helpful. And also, this is streamed. So, this is available on the internet all the time to larger audiences. So you need this kind of collaboration between the components of the cultural community. But sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes they don't collaborate so well.
But I think referring to that, it's a community responsibility and a certain social innovation. The way 10 years ago, quality newspapers, when the digital transformation came in, it was enormous pressure on the quality. But we keep, I think, referring to your work, we have to keep that exclusive quality, and at the same time, to the inclusive way of being connected are giving so many new opportunities. And it's a change of paradigm in which we are working in the art world as in the media. But it's giving, on the level of social innovation, fantastic opportunities. So I see it as the balance between the small group here and the way we can be part of the debate in a global world is great. And at the same time, coming back to my visit to Abu Dhabi Louvre, not Louvre Abu Dhabi, I would change the name, because it's an ownership of the museum of the community here in the first place, is that we were waiting for this community here to make a museum where we're waiting for in Europe for so many years. The way of looking to arts and culture in a way that heritage is for everybody, heritage to all. And the way we have to work on that from preservation to innovation. And that's for me the new museum of the Abu Dhabi Louvre is in that way something we have to learn in Europe. We have to bring back the experience of the Abu Dhabi Louvre to Europe, because we became in certain way in silos, thinking in very closed areas. So it was an open opportunity.
Well, it's a very profound idea, because the new museums lead change.
And we have to share heritage. That's fantastic with what we see here. That there is no hierarchy anymore. That we can bring these stories, we had it in books, but we never saw it in a museum. And that's for me the enormous new way of thinking in museology today.
Right. So it breaks ground. It's not
Absolutely.
just a
Absolutely.
remarkable building, but it is a new idea. And as I walked through it yesterday, it clearly my reaction is this is the first truly global museum.
And I hope that it will have an impact on heritage, I would say, tourism, in a way of seeing a different way in these heritage museums. So it's fundamentally innovative.
Well, I see our friend Saif has joined us, who you remember from earlier, who is the Director General of the Department of Tourism, Culture and Tourism, and I'm sure you agree. You hope it will drive tourism as well. But this notion of new institutions, new festivals, leading the old ones, I think is very powerful. Has that figured in your calculus at all? Have you thought, where can we go with this that others have not traditionally gone?
I think before I answer, I want to go back to the Louvre, because I think it's the Louvre Abu Dhabi. I think, there was one question raised yesterday about I think the local, how do you fit in the local culture within the Louvre? I mean, from what I observed, there was a lot of work from French collections. So I think with the Louvre Abu Dhabi, we also need to think of question of how do you mediate this, the French, the world heritage from French collections, within the context of Abu Dhabi. You also need to think about how do you make it accessible to local audiences. That was my, I think that's something that we mustn't lose sight of, that a lot of the work was coming from Musée du Quai Branly, Louvre, Musée Guimet. So I saw the names of like a lot of French institutions. So yeah, that's something that needs to be addressed in terms of how do large institutions like the Louvre engage with local communities. So this remains something that needs to, it needs to remain on the agenda. Now, in terms of the Casablanca Biennial, so the question was, you asked.
Well, it's just that new festivals can lead traditional festivals. Festivals in new areas can lead festival in traditional areas.
I'd say for the Casablanca Biennial, so as I was saying, it's going to be the 4th edition, and what I'm trying to do with that, and also I've worked in obviously I've worked on biennials in Europe, I've worked on biennials in Africa, and what I'm trying to do is use maybe the old model of festivals to sort of take what's good in the model, but also see how it fits within the local context where I'm working. So I'm trying to make it in a way that it fits you have to take into consideration the infrastructure on the ground and how you engage with different stakeholders. That could be the media in terms of how do you make your project accessible. Actually, it comes back to what we were talking earlier. How do you make it accessible to local audience? So how do you engage with the press as well? And for me, the project is very much about the art project, but it's also about how do you share knowledge in terms of art criticism, education, training staff, and making it so that it's also a platform for tomorrow and for future art professionals as well. So I'm sort of combining a bit of both, a bit of the old model, but also new models, and creating new things and seeing how, in a way, you can experiment with the format of a biennial within the context of Morocco.
It's a good point. Now, one of the other interesting things that's driving change that we talked a little bit about here yesterday, and also a bit the day before, is the changing models that affect the media world.
Yes.
And even in the olden days when you were running the National, it was still a thought that you build a website, you build a platform, you build a newspaper, editors determine what goes into it, and that drives the equation. And even in just a couple of years, we have moved rapidly and heavily towards on-demand driven media, where in fact platforms themselves are of less value. It's possible to use these universal platforms, Google, Twitter, and so forth, YouTube, and reach audiences of millions without having a brand name behind you. And I think that changes the media equation here, it democratizes it to some extent. I'm just wondering how you think that shift might affect these kind of issues.
No, absolutely. That's a valid point, David. Things are changing rapidly in the media world, and we do see it almost every day. And yeah, since I left, I set up Syndication Bureau, and the idea is content is always king in a way. That's where the value is, no matter what the platform is. And in sort of the, we live in a day where there's all that talk of fake news. It's always been there. It's not a first time. It's not our year of fake news. It's always been part of, I think, people, as long as whenever, far back as they've existed. There's always been fake news. But then how can you discern the fake from the facts? Or fake from also sort of measured opinions or measured commentary on the news behind events. And I think that's the other challenge where we talked about as well, is that the issue of pace. People are in a rush. I'm constantly bombarded on Twitter and Instagram, all these pictures, all these news and headlines. Do I have time to discern what's true, what's not true? Do I have time to discern what is relevant to me, what makes sense to me, what is important to me or not? That's a constant distraction. So I think what we lack also is to the time and the space where we can just take it a bit slower and have a measured approach, a thought-out approach to whether it's the media coverage of events or commentary and opinion analysis. Because we do need to delve a bit deeper, offer more insight, a more nuanced approach to coverage. Otherwise, I think we do the public a disservice. So absolutely, I think there are opportunities out there, and I think we have to seize them. We can learn from what's not working and just say, that's it. And absolutely, consumption now is more subscription-driven, unlike before, the free news. And that is definitely a challenge to a lot of the established media entities out there. And I just want to comment on the issue of education. I think education is key here. If we are talking about getting more public engagement, I think we need to start working with stakeholders such as schools, education institutions, universities, as well as these public spaces or the galleries and the museums. And again, make it more accessible, that anybody, if you want to consume a bit of culture today, it's okay, it's easy, it's accessible. It's not for the elite.
Well, I think, by the way, and we'll talk about this very shortly, but some of the ideas that have come out of the incubator and the workshops focus on how we can use new technologies and combine communities like the community of artists to change education models, so that you can satisfy education problems, and that even a group like us, our community, could really make a difference in how we bring arts education to communities out there by using existing technologies and existing platforms and a community of artists and doing some matching. Yeah. We got a couple minutes here, and I suspect we've got questions, and so I will go over here to the question cubes and look to the audience for questions for the group on this issue of the role different partners can play in activating some of these some of these ideas we've talked about. So, yes, ma'am. I'm not going to throw this at you. I'm going to give it to you very gently.
Hi, David. How are you?
Yeah, hi.
Since the summit last year, a lot has happened in terms of content, whether it's television, whether it's the Louvre as well, and other collaborations. But the most interesting thing that I've seen is actually the artists working together. So you have a group that is, produces something in Arabic, and then you have English along with it. And then you see that fantastic energy that comes when you bring different art forms together, and suddenly they create something that is just so much more dynamic, and just can really transcend many different cultures. So I'm just wondering, how, with a group like this, David, do you get many of your artists to collaborate beyond this and get together and produce something for next event that is cross-cultural?
Well, first of all, thank you for that question. I didn't plant the question, but clearly what we are talking about in the next session from the Artist Incubator is exactly that. It's how do you get the artists to work together going forward. But Paul, the core theme here has been unexpected collaborations, that we live in a world in which these technologies, whether it's communications technologies or simply ease of transportation, make collaborations possible that were never possible before. Virtual collaborations, distance collaborations, collaborations between different areas. And I'm wondering, how does that affect how you do your work?
But I think from both of what from Christine and Mohammed, it's in the main fundamental element of the community participation. I think you can do it on a campus, you can do it in an agora as this. I think it's giving, I think, a lot of opportunities. I think that we have to focus mainly at what we named the next generation of this, seeing what we can add from this community. I think that the visionary ideas of a form of Renaissance, and to share that with others, because at the end, I see that in the curatorial work, if we exchange at the end, we have all the same questioning. Artists here in the Arab world, in the Gulf, or I would say in Africa today, but the end is, and that's what you say from the Western European countries, is at the end the problematic of visas. We have to keep people to can exchange the mobility of artists. With the digital platform, you can do everything. But at the end of the day, people need mobility. You said so many people came here, but many artists want to come to us. What is us? Is it Europe? Is it America? Is it the Arab world? We have a common responsibility in the arts world to connect. It's not only a market at the end. It's also people to have to create, and it's bottom up. And that visionary idea of the Renaissance we have here with the new museum, and I think we had the debate in the 70s in Europe between type of museums. If you look to the 70s and you look to Jonas Friedman's ideology of architecture, it had to be a community project, and Christine is referring to that. It's fundamental. If you build a concert hall like in Hamburg of $1 billion, or you make the Abu Dhabi Louvre, it's also a symbol of a community who want to share their values. And at the same time, you cannot do everything at the same time. It takes generations, but at the end, it's an education issue, at the end, bottom up. And I think the artist has to be part of that. It's not what is the state doing for me, but what can I do for my community? It's a very fundamental individual responsibility. And the digital cannot be the end of things. Artists don't want new technology. It's the technology who has to come and be inspired by the creativity of an artist laboratory. And that's the Renaissance we want to have. And that I think I found here a form of Renaissance and building, I would say, new cultural workers for the Gulf, in a certain way. We are all part of that responsibility. Politicians, tourism, the education people are a part of that. And so that's my very modest way to come here, but at the same time I would like to have you in Brussels.
Yes.
And that we can do things together in the media or in the curatorial work. But in the middle of that, it's the artist performance. we are, I would say, a part in a very modest way. The artist is the center of the project, and the scientist. It's not only the art. Arts and science can be a part of the making the difference in a political agenda.
Nora, you got a quick question? And
Yeah, I do. And most of you in the context of this convening know me as an arts advocate, but my real passion and what I do as well is independent curating of programs in Washington, D.C., not in the institutions, but outside the institutions. So Christina and I have a bit of a past talking about those issues. And Paul, you had said early on about dealing with bureaucracy. And I really feel, and I've heard this, it's not just I thought it was an American issue, but I understand from here it's a global issue. I think you have to embrace bureaucracy, because if we don't, then they will never understand the power of artists. So for me, to do a project in a very complicated city like Washington, which now is even more complicated, you need to have the buy-in from Homeland Security, from the National Park Service, from all of these federal bureaucracies in this very small city. And I can't tell you how excited the bureaucrats are to be engaged with something for the arts.
We have to show a lot of empathy.
We do.
But
yeah.
we have to deal with civil servants. So I prefer to use the civil servants in a civil society, how these stakeholders can work together. And
Nora didn't use that term because we don't have civil society in the US anymore.
But I'll be honest, it's I would say this, like Pistoletto said, the center is in the periphery. And we need to work with these communities. The center is not the big art centers like mine. It's what is going on. The mapping of new cooperative workplaces that artists create all over the world are much more important than my institutions, and trying to help to connect them. It's much more important.
Let me ask Christine, how do you respond to what Nora just said? Do you do the same thing? Do you find it's essential to work in that kind of collaboration with the government, the bureaucracies as well?
Well, in the case of Morocco, I'm letting the founder of the Biennial engage with Moroccan officials. But in terms of, Paul, you raised a very important issues, especially, because I've worked a lot with, in Africa. It's really difficult. Someone was asking a question about collaborations, but as curators, we travel a lot, so we get the chance to meet different artists and create also those collaborations. But it's true that art is also about a human relationship, sort of human dialogue, and we need to be in the same space like we are today. And traveling is an issue. There's it's particularly for African artists. So we do have indeed to create projects that officials will, sort of endorse in a way to facilitate the traveling of artists who are, marginalized from, the West in terms of access to, facilities just to travel, freedom of movement.
Thank you.
Perhaps
You're going to have the last word here.
This is it?
This is it.
Oh, this is it. Quoting someone.
Just for this panel. You can keep talking.
No, it's fine. Thank you, though. No, on that point, I think we need to look at how we can incentivize even the bureaucracies to get on board. I think a lot of them do get excited when they know that they're part of an important project, and media can perhaps talk about their story, talk about, why did that bureaucracy get involved? And I think they also seek sometimes that exposure. It is reaffirming perhaps for them. So that's a way of incentivizing bureaucracies who might be distant from the culture, environment or sector. And then hence it does empower the artist. But then I think all parties would feel, as well as the artist, knowing that yes, he or she might be there to express himself or herself with a piece of music or a work of art, but knowing that it's important to know that the other bureaucracy or the public are part of that art as well, because in the end, they will consume it in a way, they will see it, they will listen or hear it. So once the artist understands at the other end, the consumer, and I think the consumer needs to understand the artist as well, and again, media can play a role here. Of bridging building the channels.
I've been persuaded to give 15 seconds.
Okay.
Super short. I'm part of that cultural bureaucracy. I'm Mexican. And you know what? Public servants are changing too. I'm enjoying this forum because it's so important for me to listen to all of you. My background is art, but I decide in my country what to do, what to present. And I think if you invite economists, scientists to these forums, we will be open because we want to be part of the community too. And we want to help, and we want to address really like impact projects and change our society. So I think it's very important for us to be here too.
Great, and I think that's a very good place to draw this conversation to a close. But stay, because the next session we're going to have the Artists Incubator, and we're going to get the perspective of the artists who've been here on what we might do next, and they're also going to perform a little bit. And then following that, we're going to go into a session with Noor Al-Kabi and Saif and Mohammed Al-Mubarak and Carla. We're going to hear the workshop ideas, and then we want to draw on all of you to say, what should we do next? How do we build upon this? And so for this collaboration to be effective, you have to be part of it. So please stay with us. Join me in thanking this terrific panel for starting us off today. And now, Carla, come on down. And Carla's going to introduce, and you folks can go and be de-microphoned.
What a fantastic panel, and it touches upon so many of the subjects that we'll be talking about next. I will have the pleasure over the course of the next hour or so to talk to you about what we artists have been doing in something that we've initiated here at Culture Summit this year called the Artist Incubator. And it's a very exciting project that I've developed here with a real desire to use artists as catalysts for positive social change and create that community a little further. But to kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce you to two very special artists who I also have the pleasure of calling personal friends. Molly Joyce is an active composer and performer whose music has been described as impassioned, vibrant, inventive, and communicates straight from the heart. Her works have been commissioned and performed by several distinguished ensembles, including the New World Symphony, New York Youth Symphony, Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, and the New Juilliard, as well as the Dakota and contemporaneous ensembles. As a performer, she often plays on her vintage toy organ. She is a young arts artist and has received degrees from the Juilliard School and Yale University. Jacqueline Suskin is a writer, performance poet, and artist based in Los Angeles. She's the author of 2 books, the latest entitled Go Ahead and Like It, available from 10 Speed Press of Penguin Random House. Known for her ongoing work with a project she calls the Poem Store, Suskin composes on-demand poetry on her manual typewriter for customers who choose both a topic and a price in exchange for a unique verse. She's been featured in the New York Times, T Magazine, LA Times, and has performed at events from various organizations including Art Basel, Los Angeles Contemporary, Art of Elysium, and SF MoMA. I've had the pleasure of working with both of these extraordinary women on personal projects, and really it's an honor for me to invite them here today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Molly and Jacqueline.
Actually just me first. I like to say that I get to say that I met Carla at the White House, which is really fun to say. This project, Poem Store, has allowed me to take my poetry out into public spaces and write for people who maybe normally wouldn't be exposed to poetry. The typewriter is kind of just like an extra outlet to call people in. And it's been my only job for 8 years. So people will say, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a poet. And they think that means I'm a professor or that I'm part of some institution. But I get the joy of saying, no, I'm a poet in a completely different way. So my work is all about accessibility, which means not only am I trying to make poetry accessible to anyone and everyone and let them pay me whatever they want to for it, But I'm also trying to write in an accessible way. So I'm not trying to be esoteric or write only for my poetry colleagues. I do that work also, but with this project, I really kind of pride myself in trying to create a practice that allows anyone to come up and get a poem. So I'm going to show you how that works, because Molly and I have worked together before, and the way I work with Carla is I write these poems, and then composers take the poetry and put it to music. So Molly has done that, and after I'm done writing you all a poem, she'll perform a song that was created just for this, a world premiere, if you will. But the way I like to do this with a big crowd is basically on the count of 3, just say a subject, and I will hear a few of them, and maybe you can pull from things that we've been talking about over the last few days, or something that's inspiring you now. Usually the way this works is it's extremely personal, but since you're such a large group, I'll just have to pull from all of us and all of our inspirations. So on the count of 3, maybe think for a second what you would want to have your poem be about, and then say a word out loud. Are you ready for that? Okay, 2 people, that's all I need, two subjects. All right, 1, 2, 3. What was that? Representation, and what? Transformation, representation, fear. Okay. Peace, all right. What? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna try to condense those things, but I sort of like representation and transformation, so I might use those as my main. Okay, want to hear it? Transform the sense of self and let the form of tradition take on newness that resides in the root that we all share. Time tells us that we cannot be seen unless the wash of reason weaves itself into a connection. So heart to heart, culture to culture, the craft of all we create brought forth in a way that says yes, we are seen in unison. So that's the way that works. And now you'll hear Molly perform and just think that I wrote a poem like that for some friends who write a little zine once a year, and it's a full day, and they said, what's a poem about today? And I created this poem, and then I sent it to Molly, and she made a song out of it. So an unexpected collaboration is kind of everything that my job entails, because I'm just constantly collaborating with people in unexpected ways. So thanks for being a part of that.
poems.